Welcome to Sanity Check, I'm Jack. It's been over a month since my first episode, and damn if a lot hasn't happened again. But because of that, I really wanted certain things to settle before making what probably has to be my most complicated and careful post, as it's mainly dominated by, you guessed it, the Epstein Files. Trigger warning on all of it ahead of time. This is all so messed up, but I try not to get too graphic, so for those of you who really want to make sense of it all like I do, please stick around. Because since our bombing of Iran has made searches for the Epstein Files drop by 95%, in the name of both my hard-headedness and tendency towards self-sabotage, what better time for us to dive in? Also around this time that I wanted to post this, I suddenly got a mysterious illness. No, it was a sinus infection. It sucked. I don't want to talk about it. I want to talk about this video first. You may have seen this shot of Alex Pretty's altercation with ICE agents 11 days prior to his homicide by ICE agents. When I first saw this, it was on Facebook, mostly right-wing pages, in what I was sure then from how it looked was either an AI-generated video or an AI-enhanced video. While I'm now sure that it wasn't an AI-generated video, and while I'm still fairly convinced that what I saw originally was an AI-enhanced video, which had become a trend on a lot of Facebook pages. Here's one that enhanced Pretty without a beard. Now you can see why I'm using the air quotes. I can no longer be sure of that experience, because I tried finding one for this post and I couldn't find any, which either means that they'd all been reported, hopefully, or intentionally taken down. The version I saw had overly smooth surfaces and a taillight that didn't look real at all once it came out. Either way, by this point, a lot of people clearly had a similar experience to me, or more believed that the original was 100% AI generated. I've even seen friends of mine post stuff like this, like somewhat recently. And I mean, take a look, aren't Pretty's motions kind of uncanny? Well, I'm here to tell you that it did happen, why it happened, why it matters in Alex Pretty's homicide case, and how, if this method of media manipulation by these right-wing pages, which I'm sure have no connection at all to the administration, was intentional, it would be an example of a modified limited hangout. A limited hangout is jargon that developed from spies in the CIA, describing a tactic where a spy reveals, or sometimes volunteers, some piece of non-damaging information, falling short of revealing their cover or what they're really trying to hide. Often the public will find the non-damaging secret information so fascinating that the possible existence of any damaging information still being kept secret will be neglected or not considered. In the process of covering up the Watergate scandal in 1973, John Ehrlichman, a key domestic affairs advisor to President Richard Nixon, coined the term modified limited hangout during a recorded meeting.
You want sound? I got you sound.
Have you considered all other possibilities you see here? John, you're the one who is supposed to.
That's right.
You know the bodies.
I think we've had a good go-round on.
You think we want to go this route now and to let it hang out, so to speak.
Well, it isn't really that.
It's a limited hangout.
It's a limited hangout.
It's a modified limited hangout.
This is a defensive method of damage control, usually from large institutions or public figures, that involves admitting partial truths to shift blame onto others, or even including discoverable falsehoods in an attempt to taint the whole disclosure as dismissible. So in the case of Alex Pretty, seen here at other angles in an altercation with ICE 11 days before his homicide, the drop of this video is meant by those right-wing profiles to cast Alex in a more sinister light to their audience, disturbingly shifting the narrative to those inclined as to whether this homicide 11 days later was somehow justified. And if some of these videos were modified by AI, whether the incident had happened at all. These were indeed the reactions and conversations that dominated online spaces after this video had dropped, which left the true implications and questions this video brings forth conveniently idling on the table. Because you start to see three conversations we could have about this video. The two I just mentioned, protect them, the ICE agents who unalived him. And the other one, if we keep it in the conversation, could protect us. You see, there already have been many reported cases of ICE agents retaliating against observers, protesters, and critics in Minneapolis. Here's some reporting on it from the Marshall Project. And in my mind, there's no question that no one who just spits at an ICE agent or even kicks out an ICE agent's taillight deserves what happened to Alex Preddy 11 days later, particularly when you consider what Alex was reacting to that day.
On January 13th, on the way to my 39th appointment at Hennepin County's Traumatic Brain Injury Center, I encountered a traffic jam caused by ICE vehicles and no signs indicating how to get around it. I had not wanted to pull into a blocked, chaotic intersection, but verbally agreed to do so and rolled down my window after an agent yelled, "Move! I will break your effing window!" His first instruction. Agents on all sides of my vehicle yelled conflicting threats and instructions that I could not process while watching for pedestrians. Then the glass of the passenger side window flew across my face. I yelled, "I'm disabled," at the hands grabbing at me, and an agent said, "Too late."
This disabled woman had been dragged down the street from her car, in addition to children getting maced in the face that day. So the real question to ask about this video is not whether it's AI, not whether it reflects well on Alex Preddy. It's, are these agents in this video Jesus Jesse Ochoa and Raimundo Gutierrez, the two names that have been revealed as implicated in the unaliving of Alex Preddy 11 days later? And was it a targeted retaliation? You could also see Preddy's gun here, and then remember the ICE agent in gray grabbing that gun after they tackled him. We still don't know that ICE agent's name, only the two that are allegedly responsible for the 10 shots. But you see how the right, by framing the conversation, or the left by asking the wrong questions, have already, either intentionally or unintentionally, run cover for these agents and the administration. That's how a modified limited hangout is meant to work. We're seeing this concept on a much larger scale right now with the execution of the Epstein Files Transparency Act. It's been genuinely difficult to know when to post this next episode because of the scale of information and misinformation that's out there. With this channel, I'm very intentionally not trying to break news because methods such as we discussed last time, shock therapy as laid out in Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine, and the multiple disaggregated modified limited hangouts are the bread and butter of Trump's political machine. So instead of jumping from one data point lily pad to another, I'm waiting to see what's confirmed and what's not, where the good reporting settles, and what it tells us about the overall picture. So first off, let's sweep away the bullshit because there's a ton of even accidental modified limited hangouts in addition to those that are clearly nefarious. So there's this email about a 9-year-old. That's one such example. Due to all the data transfers, certain characters were replaced by equal signs. You can see them all throughout when you searched his emails originally. They've seemed to fix a lot since. Anyway, this equal sign was from a 1, so they're talking about a 19-year-old. Not that that in and of itself means that the sender should be redacted. There's a fishy letter from Epstein to Larry Nassar, postmarked 3 days after he died. There's also AI-generated images of Epstein alive in Israel. A deep fake of Ghislaine in Montreal, originally from a known AI artist account on Instagram. And a clearly AI-generated picture of New York Mayor Zoran Mamdani as a child with a bunch of people in the files, including his mother, Mira Nair, a film director who Ghislaine threw an after-party for the premiere of her film Amelia at her Manhattan townhouse. And I'm not saying Epstein's definitely not alive, but claims such as these, or that his Fortnite account is still active, have been debunked as third-party hoaxes. And easy ones at that. If I had to guess, I'd say he's not alive. Otherwise, the circumstances of his death probably wouldn't be so disputed by those close with him. And we'll talk about why that is. But with every one of these points of information or videos, it's important that we all check sources before passing it on, and also asking one question about the narrative it puts forward. That question is, can I do anything at all with this information? Is it at all politically or structurally valuable, or simply meant to flood the zone and make you feel helpless? Or worse, is it being used to harass or intimidate people? Because the other thing I'm seeing is that some of these people who have made allegations in the files with redacted names are, in several cases, supposedly being identified online in an effort to discredit them in one way or another. I've been making it a point to reject any such projects out of hand. Despite the fact that the DOJ left the names of several victims illegally unredacted in some of their releases. They've since been re-redacted, but who knows what damage has already been done. It will begin to become clear why these names of victims and witnesses who have come forward are being kept anonymous, for very good reasons. So now, bullshit off the decks, what do we know so far about the Epstein Files? Well, for one, I think it's quite clear that we're watching probably the biggest cover-up in our lifetime unravel in real time. I mean, 9/11 could have been bigger if we'd had a 9/11 Files Transparency Act, but alas. Also, this cover-up in some way or another may involve 9/11. Iran-Contra, Gamergate, Pizzagate, QAnon, COVID denial, and vaccine hysteria, the rise of cryptocurrency, Palantir, and the emergence of the modern rising surveillance state, and may well have shaped a lot of modern US and global culture and politics. I mean, he's truly a Forrest Gump figure of modern national nightmares. But unlike Forrest Gump, you know, the more I hear about this guy, Jeff Epstein, the more I don't care for him. R.I.P. Norm Macdonald. They're just wild emails that suggest that they're referring to victims, first of all, just as victims. Apparently in code using food, although notably not pizza. I think they just are all really actually like stoked on pizza. Explicitly referring to grape and torture, he ordered 6 55-gallon drums of industrial-grade sulfuric acid in 2018 and allegedly tried to use his New Mexico Zorro Ranch location as a baby farm to spread his seed. But how did he accomplish all of this with impunity for as long as he did? Well, let's take it from the top. I've created this timeline of Jeffrey Epstein's entire adult life and professional career. I find this instructive because a lot of things get conflated across decades. For example, I was talking with someone that used the argument that if Donald Trump were implicated in the Epstein files, the Democrats would have released them 10 years ago. To which I pointed out that 10 years ago, there were no Epstein files as we have them today. 10 years ago, Epstein was committing his crimes. And as it turns out, seemingly with the tacit allowance or protection of people involved in the first Trump administration. Not only that, Trump himself is implicated many times in crimes pending an investigation that his FBI director is clearly refusing to initiate. And a lot of people still seem to have trouble conceptualizing that Epstein was arrested for the second time and died during the first administration. So that's why, if you map it out, you start to get a clear picture of the evolution of these crimes and how these networks start to manifest and grow. Each of these ticks is a year. First, in 1974, at 21, he's at the Dalton School, a New York City Ivy League prep school, as a calculus and mathematics teacher. He would have taught high school grades 9 through 12. Needless to say, inappropriate behavior was noticed. He was dismissed for poor performance 2 years later. Next, he works for Bear Stearns, starts as a junior assistant to a floor trader, quickly moves up to an options trader. He's a smart guy with numbers, no doubt. He became a limited partner by 1980. He was asked to leave in 1981 for a Regulation D violation. As far as I can tell, Regulation D requires an offer or sale of securities to be registered with USEC. He then started his own consulting firm, Intercontinental Assets Group, Inc. IAG was a company where he did consulting for very wealthy clients on corporate embezzlement and investment strategies. It's also where things start to get interesting because this is where Les Wexner enters. This is where some of the earliest accusations against Epstein and Donald Trump in the files take place. And it also corresponds almost perfectly with another infamous US scandal, the Iran-Contra affair. Basically, to recap Iran-Contra, for those of you who don't know, from 1981 to 1986, despite Congress prohibiting U.S. funding to a brutal cocaine-peddling resistance group in Nicaragua, the Contras, the Reagan administration began to do so through the profits from arms trafficking to Iran. despite already funding Iraq in their war against them. This was facilitated by mediators such as Saudi businessman and arms dealer, the now late Adnan Khashoggi, who negotiated the movement of weapons between Israel, another go-between, and Iran. One good question here, is this the guy Epstein learned trafficking from? Because in the 80s, Khashoggi was hailed as the richest man alive and had a reputation for his geopolitical influence and opulent lifestyle, which earned him the moniker the Great Gatsby of the Middle East. He was also an early client of Jeffrey Epstein in his IAG period, along with Les Wexner, around 84-ish. Some of these meetings are unclear. We still have no official record when Jeffrey and Ghislaine met, for instance. Former associate Stephen Hoffenberg claimed that this is when Epstein was trained by British defense contractor Sir Douglas Leese in arms smuggling, shell company creation, and money laundering, and helped smuggle Chinese weapons as well to Iran. And an anonymous FBI informant claimed that Epstein was trained as a spy under Ehud Barak, who would later become prime minister, as early as this, already a full-blown co-opted Mossad agent. Now, these are all unverified claims. What we do know is that Epstein had an Austrian passport with a false name, where his residence was listed in Saudi Arabia at this time, and after the Iran-Contra affair had come to light, Jeffrey quietly helped repurpose the planes the CIA used to transport arms from Israel to Iran to Les Wexner for Abercrombie and Fitch to transport their clothing. Soon after, he was given Wexner's power of attorney. There are also two hugely notable allegations in the Epstein Files from victims that take place at this time directly against Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump, and a third in the files, oddly, just against Trump. The first one I call Biter and Victim 2. Both talked to the FBI in 2019, saying that in 1983, Epstein introduced Biter to Donald Trump in New York or New Jersey when they were between 13 and 15. Trump said he didn't like that Biter was a tomboy type. Despite that, she was subsequently pushed into his exposed member. She bit his member, and he slapped her and kicked her out. Victim 1 had been privy to this exchange. The FBI purportedly called Biter to be interviewed ultimately 4 times, and some of it was even used in the case against Ghislaine Maxwell. But of these 4 interviews, only the first one, which didn't include this story or Donald Trump directly, was initially released. We still knew this story existed, however, from an FBI PowerPoint presentation detailing the Epstein Files. In that first interview, which was initially released, Biter showed the FBI a well-known picture of Epstein and Trump and asked that Trump be cropped out because he was afraid of involving high-profile people due to safety concerns. Congress recently made them release the other interviews, which they claimed were incorrectly marked as duplications. Very, very likely. Very convenient. It's the other interviews that include these accusations against Trump, and multiple factual claims made by Biter have been verified, including Biter's mother's imprisonment for embezzlement from her company, which Epstein set up in order for her to pay him extortion money from pictures he had of her daughter. She said he ruined her family. Biter also detailed constant targeted harassment and silencing throughout her life after these experiences, and eventually stopped cooperating with authorities when her car was run off the road several times. She said she couldn't be sure whether some of this harassment was initiated by Epstein or Trump. Then there are 2 other allegations from around this time, one from a victim that claimed her uncle trafficked her to Trump and Epstein, who both raped her several times when she was 13, and that Trump was there as a witness when her uncle disposed of her unalived infant daughter's body in Lake Michigan in 1984. The implication being that her daughter was the product of her being trafficked. And then another from a caller who gave a tip to the FBI about her friend, Victim 1. Victim 1 confided in caller that she had been out drinking and ended up at Trump Plaza in 1987. A man approached her and asked her if she wanted to meet Donald Trump. The man then gave her a drink, and the next thing she knew, she woke up on a bed, sore, with $300 on the mantle. Victim 1 did confide in her friend that she felt like she had been raped and did see a flash of Donald Trump's face, but didn't go to the police because she was drunk and thought they wouldn't believe her. Furthermore, Victim 1 was having an affair at the time with her attorney, who was married. After a fight, she was seen in a bar with a man no one there recognized, not the attorney, but that seemed to know victim one. After they left the bar, she was never seen again, which is why the caller was calling. The most interesting thing about this last accusation is that while it's very disturbing, I don't understand why it's in the Epstein Files if it doesn't involve Jeffrey Epstein. What leads were they pursuing when they collected this? What does the FBI know that we don't? It's also a secondhand account of a drunk victim who disappeared, and while I think this certainly speaks to a pattern, could this be roped into the files because it involves intel Epstein had on Trump? Or is it yet another modified limited hangout? I want to make it clear, I don't know what's true here, but I maintain all of it ought to be taken seriously in a bigger picture by the FBI, and they should be listening to and protecting these victims. Anyway, increasingly embroiled in scandal, exit Khashoggi officially, enter Les Wexner in a big way. Les buys Epstein his apartment on Manhattan's Upper East Side, 9 East 71st Street, the one which U.S. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick, who bought the apartment next door a decade later in 1998, and has made it clear, eerily clear, that Epstein was in apartment 9 and he was in apartment 11. Once he moved in is when he placed himself meeting Epstein with his wife and decided to never see that disgusting individual again. Oh wait, I also took my kids to the island that one time. Oh wait, I went without them that other time. Oh wait, I also co-founded that company with him. Speaking of, he, Jeffrey, starts his own company, J. Epstein & Co., right before moving in himself in 1988, which he would do business under until his death. He then buys his Palm Beach property in Florida in 1990 and Zorro Ranch in New Mexico in 1993. And this is around when an account of a limo driver for Trump that gave testimony to the FBI would have happened, around 1995, where he heard our 45th president on the phone with someone named Jeffrey, and they discussed abusing a girl. The driver later transported a girl that explicitly accused Trump and Epstein of forcing themselves on her, and that she feared for her life as she reported it. Later, on Christmas Day, 1999, she called the driver to say that she did, in fact, report it to the police. The driver said she had done good. Then on the 10th of January 2000, he saw the news that her head had been blown off in Kiefer, Ohio. Police at the scene said they didn't think it could have been self-inflicted, but the coroner ultimately ruled it as such. It's also around this time in 1995 that Katie Johnson's story starts, and another serious accusation in the Epstein Files against Donald Trump, along with a series from Jane Doe and Tiffany Doe, and to be clear, these are pseudonyms to protect the victims. And I'll spare you most of the gory details on her accusations because this video of Katie exists discussing everything with her lawyer, except to say she remembered she was 13 because Trump took an interest in her because she looked like his daughter, who was 13 at the time. Katie Johnson also speaks to a pattern because she's the only one of these victims that Donald Trump and Epstein share that actually survived and came forward to try to sue them. Between their two networks, these victims all recount threats against them, their family, physical harm, reputational harm, and economic harm if they ever come forward. Most of these victims and anonymous tips are dismissed and characterized by investigators as unreliable or suspect, or at least they now are. Often they cite that these tips came out before the 2016 or 2020 elections. I think it's clear that, especially then, it takes enormous courage and also some sort of patriotic duty to report these stories describing the crimes of powerful men like this. And it seems to me that testimony that risks much and fits a pattern and motive should be given more weight, not less, especially at this volume. Katie Johnson, for instance, ended up dropping her suit in the lead up to the 2016 election, in which Donald Trump was the candidate because she was getting death threats. In 1998, Jeffrey buys Little St. James, a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which has long been a notorious trafficking route, mainly drugs, but humans too. There's been a lot made of the files that are missing and how there's a pronounced absence from 1999 to I think 2002, right around 9/11. I think there are some graphics from charts out there that aren't verified, but that this is generally true. It's definitely true that they haven't released all the files. British reporters have compared data sizes from what we have versus what we expected and estimate that we only have 2% of the files so far. And the last DOJ retraction of 47,000 files after our Iran strike, which we've since gotten back, so who knows why. Could be because Trump's the 47th president? Could they be playing games like that? And then from this period, there's also an email from one Ed Epstein asking whether Ghislaine wants to be on a shadow commission on 9/11. That is also true, and here is the email. Now, it should be noted that the now late Edward J. Epstein was an author, investigative journalist, and political science professor at Harvard who specialized in documenting espionage. He wrote about the Warren Commission and Armand Hammer, and Ghislaine's father, Robert Maxwell, was a similar triple spy figure, so could this have been an independent project? Maybe, maybe not. Ghislaine turns him down, saying she cannot be on it. Almost conflict of interest sounding, with no other reason given. This is also where the infamous photo of Virginia Giuffre and Prince Andrew is taken by none other than Jeffrey Epstein in 2001. Virginia had been recruited by Maxwell a year earlier, and Andrew had just gotten an official position in the UK government as special representative for international trade and investment. He had this position until 2011 and stepped down amid controversial associations and expenditures, which completely tracks with what we've found out about him since his arrest. Ultimately, that's what he'll be arrested for just last month. Virginia alleged that she was trafficked to Prince Andrew on 3 occasions when she was 17. Based on interviews with associates of Ghislaine and girls that were part of this ring, Epstein would characterize himself to others as medically hypersexual, needing to have sex 3 times a day, like eating meals. Ghislaine even told friends that he had seen the best doctors for it and that she couldn't keep up with his needs. She would then initiate victims with payments to give him massages. If they said they didn't want to, she would offer payments as a recruiter for other girls. And then generous contributions to renowned institutions such as the Interlochen Center for the Arts in Green Lake Township, Michigan, where Epstein went for a summer as a boy, made them fertile hunting grounds. This is how they built their sex ring and ran cover for it publicly. Meanwhile, this is also the time when Epstein started talking to scientists about his plans to make a baby farm at Zorro Ranch and impregnate 20 women at a time in order to seed the planet. He dressed this plan up in an enthusiasm for transhumanism, but we also know from his correspondence that he was a big believer in Jewish supremacy and eugenics. And we'll talk in a moment about why right now we have no way of knowing whether he was able to start implementing his plan. Either way, Epstein will be arrested in 2005 for sexual misconduct with minors, with a few suits against him and 36 direct accusers, girls ages 14 to 17. Donald Trump is reported to have called the police at this time after his arrest to tell them, "Thank God you stopped him," and everybody knows he's been doing this, which both contradicts later statements a candidate Trump would make about his lack of knowledge of Epstein's activities, which is clearly why the administration equivocated about the veracity of this information when it dropped, and also forces the question, why didn't Trump come forward and report this abuse beforehand? Nonetheless, you're going to see MAGA loyalists saying this was Trump turning in Epstein, despite the fact that, again, Epstein was already in custody. And I don't know, knowing him, calling the authorities after your friend's been arrested looks an awful lot like covering your ass after the fact. You'll also see some MAGA repeating Trump's line that he threw Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago, as he put it, for stealing people. There's an email that was just unredacted that shows one of Epstein's attorneys asking Trump's lawyer if this ever happened, to which he responds that Epstein was never a member, maybe a guest, but never thrown out. So, just more lies. But back to Epstein. Enter Alan Dershowitz, at this time as Epstein's lawyer, and officially exit Les Wexner, who withdrew his account for misallocation of funds. Here's Alan Dershowitz explaining that if Epstein was Mossad, he could have gotten him off entirely.
I could have gotten him no jail time. If he had told me he worked for the Mossad, for the CIA, he was an intelligence source, it would have been a slam dunk for me to go to whoever I had to go to, even up to the President of the United States, and I would have gotten him a deal with no time at all.
Now, I don't know about that, but Allen would begin negotiations with Alex Acosta, then United States Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, later Donald Trump's Secretary of Labor, who said he was told by his higher-ups that Epstein belonged to intelligence. He thought, in this case, it was the CIA, and to leave it alone, according to investigative journalist Vicky Ward. Acosta and Dershowitz worked out what would be called a sweetheart deal for Epstein. In it, he pleaded guilty to lesser state charges of solicitation and prostitution, ultimately served only 13 months of an 18-month prison term in Palm Beach County Jail instead of a state prison, including a work release 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and most importantly, a broad, unprecedented immunity and non-prosecution agreement, even shielding any potential co-conspirators from federal prosecution. In violation of federal law, the agreement was kept secret from nearly 100 victims. And I did a double take when I saw that figure, nearly 100 victims. I thought it was 36 girls. Is this a discrepancy? Well, apparently more victims kept coming forward during negotiations between his arrest in 2005 and the agreement's finalization in 2008, more than doubling the figure. So maybe you can see why, after he serves this sentence, he feels invincible. And it seems like most of the billionaires he corresponds with after this agree. Because you definitely get the sense from these emails between him and Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Larry Summers, Bill Gates, Ehud Barak, Woody Allen, Steve Bannon, Sultan Ahmed bin Salayem, Noam Chomsky, that everybody knew, if not everything, something. It's at this time, after he gets out in 2011, that Ghislaine starts her own company, the Terra Mar Project, an environmental nonprofit organization. She's invited to speak to the UN twice as an environmentalist. Even though she'd been given immunity from prosecution in Epstein's sweetheart deal, this keeps her busy and is seemingly a way to incubate her from any heat on Jeffrey. Not that there was much heat with Pam Bondi's term as Attorney General of Florida, also starting in 2011, as she upheld and went beyond the dubious language of this non-prosecution agreement given to him, bringing no new criminal charges in Florida and forcing more of his victims to file civil suits. Here he gets heavy into crypto, which is just coincidentally a perfect tool for committing crimes like trafficking. He funneled over $800,000 into the MIT Digital Currency Initiative through a Japanese venture capitalist named Joey Ito, and even propped up Coinbase and Blockstream with his own money when they otherwise might have been in trouble. He gets very involved with former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak here. Remember, he might have studied to be a spy under him. So much so that his New York residence was under Israeli surveillance between 2013 and 2015. He discussed Peter Thiel and Palantir with Barak, which would eventually provide AI-driven targeting and surveillance to the Israeli war effort in Gaza that were used to commit war crimes like the Where's Daddy program that would track and bomb enemy combatants after they return home so they could also target their family. Shortly after this, he bought Great St. James, another private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And then there's all the contacts he had leading up to the 2016 election in the right-wing media apparatus. Epstein met with the founder of 4chan, Christopher Moot Poole, in October of 2011, around the same time that Poole created the poll board on 4chan, which, along with its successors on 8chan, would spark and foster several evolving right-wing harassment campaigns and conspiracy movements such as Gamergate, Pizzagate, QAnon, The same communities would ultimately also gin up COVID denial and vaccine hysteria culture during the pandemic. Although Poole denies discussing any conspiratorial subject matter with Epstein during this meeting, first off, of course he does, and second off, most all contributors to 4chan and 8chan are anonymous, making the platform an easy, useful idiot for any disruption or psychological operation. Could Epstein have seen the site's potential for propaganda back then, influenced its construction, or used it for those purposes after the fact? While many details in Pizzagate or QAnon resemble Epstein's own crimes and correspondence, and remember how much they actually do love pizza, it also seems to run cover for himself and Donald Trump by exclusively targeting Democrats. Without more investigation, however, again, it's impossible to know. We do know that Steve Bannon, as financier for internet gaming entertainment, saw and described the political potential of Gamergate early on, which would go on to spawn the rest. According to author Michael Wolff, Bannon and Epstein would meet shortly after the election in 2016. Is that true? Again, when certain people meet is difficult to nail down. Either way, in 2016, Trump does get elected, and Epstein is instantly sending an email to Bill Gates saying, "People from the new administration coming," and Bannon and him become best friends and close political co-conspirators suspiciously quickly. Epstein would correspond with Bannon about Brexit, about global realignment based on tribal politics, just as Bannon is attempting to prop up far right-wing movements throughout Europe, possibly funding it in part with Epstein's crypto connections. And just as that's happening, Bannon starts to work on a document to rehabilitate Epstein's image. Who knows what terrible things they did together during that time, or what they could have eventually done to further ruin our world, because thankfully, in 2019, Epstein is arrested again, this time on trafficking charges by the FBI, then headed by FBI Director Christopher Wray, whom then President Donald Trump often had a strained relationship with. And then he seemingly, suddenly, dies in prison. And wouldn't you know it, a bunch of stuff here is super fishy. So again, what do we know? On July 23rd, 2019, while in prison awaiting trial, Epstein had an altercation with his roommate, the nature of which is disputed. His roommate said that Epstein had attempted, and I'm using a different word because I'm unclear on the rules here, suicide. Epstein said the roommate had attacked him. Either way, the two were separated and he was placed on suicide watch, which ended 6 days later on July 29th when he was moved to the special housing unit. So while Epstein was not on suicide watch when he died, some people get this wrong, procedure required him to have a new roommate, which the SHU failed to do, and he was supposed to be checked in on every 30 minutes. At 10:39 p.m. on Friday, August 9th, around his last known check-in, this blurry orange figure appeared in the only working camera, and it looked to analysts and those who worked there like the inmates' outfits, except they were all in lockdown. This was originally cut out of the released file, so coincidentally, this information drip also looks like an intentional cover-up, whether it is or isn't. Several cameras, including one at a better angle, weren't working. After 10:40 p.m., it was later found that the special housing unit had falsified count slips indicating they had performed the 30-minute check-ins when they hadn't. They discovered his body and activated the alarm at 6:33 a.m. the next day, Saturday, August 10th, 2019. It was discovered that 2 jail guards assigned to him had fallen asleep for most of their shift. Guards then removed his body and tainted the crime scene, which, as it turns out, was just fine because the feds didn't fingerprint or get any DNA from the cell anyway. And take a look at his cell. It's like he was assigned to do everyone's laundry that night. The autopsy ruled that it was a suicide, but then Dr. Michael Baden A forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's brother to attend the autopsy said the wounds were more indicative of a violent struggle. Dr. Baden had once served as chief medical examiner of New York. And keep in mind that this is Epstein's brother who, in the files, said he thought Donald Trump authorized the hit. No wonder. Ghislaine and a former Trump attorney, David Schoen, who Epstein hired on this case, also stated that they don't think it was suicide. Schoen argues he had just hired him. He was eager to mount his defense and was animated and energized, only to take his life 9 days later. The Miami Herald also just reported that an inmate told the FBI that he heard two guards talking about covering up Epstein's death. One of those guards will soon be testifying before Congress. And it would have been after this that Trump's first DOJ asked New Mexico officials to halt an early probe into Zorro Ranch, took all their information, and essentially shut the investigation down. That was in 2019, so for the last 7 years, evidence could have been removed from that site. Ghislaine was arrested after a manhunt in New Hampshire a year later. So, looking at all of this, ironically, the biggest takeaway is that there is a ton yet to be investigated. In addition to the millions of files they tried to keep from the public so far, the Telegraph has reported that there are documents that indicate that Epstein paid private detectives to remove computers and equipment from his Florida home and kept them in storage units all across the United States prior to his first arrest, with at least one of these units being given regular payments up until his death. Search warrants reviewed by the newspaper suggest that at least 6 of these storage units were never raided by the U.S. authorities, and the FBI declined to say whether they were ever searched. There's also a list of Epstein's victims who have made it clear to Congress that this DOJ will not interview them or even respond to their requests. So unfortunately, we can now see that many of the people that could initiate these investigations seem to be running interference for Trump and even Epstein instead, as the FBI's position is still that Epstein was only guilty of acts with underage girls, but not trafficking. And I don't know how he's moving these girls around without trafficking them, but that's the key difference with the 2005 arrest. That term, trafficking, inherently implicates this whole network or a ring that they'd have to investigate, including anyone who knowingly procured them, facilitated their transportation, from anyone he bribed or had a personal relationship with in customs and immigration enforcement, gynecologists, dentists, doctors, stylists, anyone at a party with a known trafficked girl. And by the way, that last group, that's the list. Even if it's not formally written down, some subset of those people are implicated. Law enforcement investigation step 1, you secure the presence of a trafficked victim at a high-profile party. You'd have to eventually interview victims, but my guess is, after everything we talked about, that is possible. Real estate moguls, the Alexander brothers, are in these files doing heinous things at such parties and are currently in jail for trafficking, for instance. Step 2, you pull flight logs from everyone in those files known to be at parties with Epstein, which the government already tracks. Step 3, you interrogate the hell out of that list of very rich and powerful men at that party, make them turn on each other, and suddenly your list gets smaller. Eventually, you'll get a short list of big names, which in retrospect could include Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, Woody Allen, Bill Clinton, Steve Tisch, Larry Summers, Bill Gates, Brett Radner, Howard Lutnick, and of course, inconveniently, the most implicated name in all of the files, more than 1 million times, according to Representative Thomas Massie, President Donald J. Trump. And to be clear, I'm not saying Trump was at any parties as a prominent political figure. Let's say he's smarter than that. He had ridden on his jet 8 times, but a lot of rich people share jets. I think it's more likely that Trump and Epstein used each other's networks at a distance since the height of their friendship in the late 80s and 90s, and that they may well have had mutual blackmail on one another. But again, without any investigation, this is just extrapolation. So if Pam Bondi, who refused to prosecute Epstein as Florida AG, or Kash Patel, who wrote a children's book about Donald Trump being a king, say are more loyal to the head of state than the Constitution, then they're going to subvert their broad prosecutorial discretion to that head of state, which, coming up on the 250th anniversary of the United States, is a complete betrayal of every founding principle. But it also means that we have to add names like Donald Trump, Kash Patel, and Pam Bondi to the list of those running interference for Epstein, along with names like Woody Allen, Steve Bannon, and even Noam Chomsky, who gave him publicity advice and called him his best friend. The way everyone in these files are animated by the power of friendship, like they're all characters in My Little Billionaire Pony that went to camp together last summer, is really something to behold. Anyway, at this point, in a perfect world, which I hope it's perfectly clear by now we do not have, there's really 5 avenues of potential investigation and prosecution. There's 1, interference, 2, horse traders and political agents, 3, financiers, 4, espionage, and 5, co-conspirators. And the Venn diagram for these 5 categories is fucking nuts when you think about it. Here, I made a graphic about it. Because all of them intersect, and every agent within one could overlap with several other categories. And out of all of these, what's most difficult to investigate is the implications on espionage networks, which many officials are now punting to and not releasing more, despite the fact that Epstein's connections and trafficking expertise make him a perfect access asset for intelligence agencies. And if he was involved in some way or another with the Iran-Contra affair, he would have had connections with Mossad and the CIA and maybe British intelligence going back to the 80s. Does that mean Mossad has whatever information Epstein had on Trump? If he did have anything on Trump, could they leverage it at some point for, say, a war with Iran? Or is that information already out there with this law? Another important question on our espionage networks: if the FBI and DOJ can't be trusted to mount investigations on such clear crimes, how can we trust the CIA has sufficient internal accountability apparatuses or hasn't been compromised in some important way by Mossad? So here's the chicken and the egg of this ever-growing constitutional crisis. Why am I on here not saying in this video that virtually all federal law enforcement authority is illegitimate? Because I could do so on here legally. That right is still protected under the First Amendment to our Constitution. And don't get me wrong, I'm close. Essentially because of the man at the top, this administration has, to some degree or another, abdicated their responsibility to the Constitution, due process, separation of powers, public health, public engagement, the independence of the press, and even the most basic accountability for acts of war. And then there's the concern that when our federal agencies are being headed by people who consistently violate the protections in that Constitution that they swore on, when does just the act of stating their illegitimacy make you a target of the largest, best-funded gang in the world? And of course, I don't want to be that sort of target, but every time I post myself saying something like this, not gonna lie, I am worried about somehow becoming another victim of the state. And you'll just have to trust me that if I was really worried about crossing some invisible line here, I wouldn't be doing any of this. Because I have come to terms with the fact that anyone who would come after me for exercising my First Amendment right, they're the criminals. And any list I'm going to be on, I'm probably already on it. But I still want to express that anxiety here to demonstrate the chilling effect they're trying to spread. But no, the reason I'm not wholesale dismissing the legitimacy of the federal government in this video right now is because, impressively, despite every protestation, they have so far been compelled to follow some laws that they don't want to follow. Chiefly among them being the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which the DOJ will say no court can compel them to comply with right before they comply with it. This is a good law that we should use as a template for future breaches of public trust. Judges are also recognizing immigrants' habeas corpus petitions and successfully enforcing a slew of rulings that limit ICE. It's not enough. ICE needs to be abolished, but it is something. Accountability and legitimacy are inextricably linked in governance. Without one, you do not have the other. Our founders recognized this in their rejection of the divine right of kings and the separation of powers with checks and balances. If there's a core principle to the genius of America, this is one we ought to protect. And it's hard to say that that's happening enough, but it is, as of now, happening. So what can we do about all this? Okay, so especially when there are no prosecutions, and there should be, there is the potential for immense political value in highlighting this cover-up. Keep talking about it. Keep advocating for victims. Keep calling for those implicated to testify, including Donald Trump. But also keep calling for investigations and prosecutions here, just like everywhere else. Also, it's election season soon. Vote these assholes out of office. Call your representatives and get them on record. Anyone who isn't demanding investigations and prosecutions, anyone who's slow-walking or tacitly agreeing with the Republicans' position on the existence of ICE, or continuing these catch-and-release distraction acts of war, has got to go. And don't worry, we'll talk about the laziest wag the dog ever next time. Anyway, that's sanity check. I know I said they'd get shorter. There was just too much here, you guys. I'll clip it though. Even so, did I miss something? I'm sure I did. Let me know in the comments. Call me out where I'm wrong. Like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.